so this is the last question for the past paper. So the question states that explain why high energy particles are required to investigate the structure of nucleon, right? So we know that basically if we have high energy, which means we have high kinetic energy, right? We have high energy, we have high kinetic energy, which has the formula 1 by 2 mv squared, which means we have high velocity, right? So if we use the lambda formula, basically the de Broglie's formula, which is wavelength is equals to Planck constant by p, right? So this p stands for mv, right? So if this is high, if the velocity is high, if the speed is high, the wavelength will be less, and this is constant, right? This is constant, so you don't have to worry about this. So we will, and the mass is also constant of the nucleon, right? So if we know that if the velocity is high, it means the wavelength is high. So you can remember these two formulas for it, right? So basically the study of nucleon requires the wavelength particle, means the wavelength of the nucleon to be like much smaller, in order to investigate what is the structure of nucleon. Like if you have high energy, basically you have high speed, which means if you have high speed then you have low wavelength, and through, because once you have low wavelength, means like you have small wavelength being made, like very 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 small wavelengths, because these particles are really really small, so you have very small wavelengths, right? So from these wavelengths we can basically identify the particles inside, or the structure inside the nucleon. So let me write the sentence out. Okay, so I have written the sentence. Study of nucleon requires the wavelength of the particles to be the size of nucleon. The size of nucleons is very small, which means I have written it out, which means the small wavelength can only be achieved, you need to achieve small wavelength because the nucleon is very small. So if you achieve small wavelength, right, you will be basically to achieve that you have to have high energy, which is high energy is proportional to velocity or speed, and the speed is basically proportional to momentum in the de Broglie's formula, right? Which means you will have less wavelength, right? You can write it in your words, in your own words. I have written it in my own words, and this is the final answer.